Welcome to The World Today. I'm Waqas Majeed Khan. Today we are talking about two very important topics which are important for us. First of all, we're going to be discussing the situation in Syria. Unfortunate developments taking place, but still the status quo has been maintained. Russia and Bashar al-Assad are still in control in Syria, but the Western powers have also weakened them. We'll talk about that in detail. Our second topic is to do with Kashmir, and the situation there is also quite untenable. Day by day, the atrocities committed against the Kashmiri people by the Indian occupation forces are increasing, and the entire world is silent or sleeping on this matter. We urge the international community to wake up and see what's happening in Kashmir and raise their voice for the Kashmiri people. Let's get the conversation started. I'd like to introduce my guests in the studio. Joining me today, first of all, we have Burhan Islam Saab. He's a former ambassador. And we have Sheryar Khan Saab, who's an academic. Thank you very much, sir, for being here. Burhan Saab, I'll start with you. First of all, the Russian president, Mr. Vladimir Putin, has warned that further Western attacks on Syria would bring chaos to world affairs. What do you think of this statement, sir?
I think there is risk, of course. United States made a calculated risk it took on Friday when it decided with its European allies to launch an offensive in Syria. This is airstrike. I think it was a risk, no doubt. But they must have calculated as to how Russia, Syria, and its allies in the region, Iran, and of course Hezbollah will react. To my feeling, it's a risk remains, but first time it did convey a message to the Syrians that look, civilian casualties owing to chemical weapons use is a risky business and cannot be tolerated. And then they coordinated it well with UK. You remember the Russians did something which the British are not very happy about, that Salisbury incident where that nerve agent was used to incapacitate two of the former agents.
But there's no proof of that, sir.
There's no proof. Actually,
the Russians are saying that the British staged it themselves, and that's the same thing that they're saying when it comes to the Syrian so-called sarin gas attack that also was staged. That's what the Russians are saying. Sheryar Saab, how do you particularly take this aspect or this angle that is being pursued by the Russians, saying that these are false flag operations, that there was no attack by the Syrian forces on the civilian population, rather it was the other way around? And it's a lot of confusion because the United Nations observers were not allowed to visit those places, or rather were in the process of visiting those places, while the Western allies along with the US attacked.
You're right. If you look at the way and the manner in which an attack in response to the chemical attack has been done, it seems that a thorough investigation was not done. Probably there was something they wanted to cover up. Now look at the credibility of these intelligence agencies, United States intelligence agency or the Western other intelligence agencies. They don't have much credibility left, because once they had claimed that weapons of mass destruction were there in Iraq, and under that pretext they attacked Iraq. So after that, they lost that credibility. Russia's claim that they don't have these proofs, or the Bashar al-Assad government did not carry out that, it has some credence. We don't have the investigative report with us, so far it's not done. But look at this. Bashar al-Assad government was winning that war. It was fast advancing there. If he is an rational actor, why he would jeopardize his plans? Why he would use sarin gas against innocent civilians when he is winning that? He's already achieving, what he wanted to achieve militarily. So there was no need of using the sarin gas, especially after 2013 when Bashar al-Assad's regime agreed under, the leadership or under the guidance of Russia that they will dismantle whatever stockpiles of chemical weapons.
In
They
fact,
have.
that was going to
They
be my
have.
next question, because we know that there was a big hullabaloo that was made around the chemical weapons issue, and Syria's chemical weapons were confiscated by the United Nations.
Yes.
And we saw that those chemical weapons were destroyed by the United Nations. We had reports of teams going in, observers saying that they had removed all chemical weapons from Syria. So how come we have the same excuse being brought to us after about 6-7 years?
It is, in the superpowers, that bigger powers use any ploy, any tactic to put pressure on its opponents. So somehow trying to build a pressure, who is going to check and verify the facts? They are, bigger powers with a lot of authority and strength in terms of ground they are holding. So nobody is going to check that. They know that, and that's why they have tried to link, to my understanding, basically it is in response to what the British Prime Minister wanted to convey to the Russians. It's more of a message to the Russians because of that nerve agent that was, they thought, found in trying to incapacitate those agents. I think that is the pretext. Basically, they thought that these TV clips which came up, this is the opportunity to really link the both incidents together and put pressure on the country, especially Syria, and countries whoever is planning ever to use nerve agents or chemical weapons anywhere in the world. So this is an opportunity they used. They wanted to convey that chemical weapons is something that we will not tolerate, although civilian casualties on the ground in the same battlefield is much higher. They are not concerned. Then refugee issues, much higher. They are not interested in helping the Syrian people actually. They don't have genuine interest in improving the condition of the suffering people of Syria. Basically, it's all politics. Global politics works like that. You are in a position to do something to put your partner or your interlocutor on back foot. You have done it. So this time it seems that Americans have done well. Retaliation was not there immediately, but your first question, as it was, Russia must be. Second time, if Americans do it, definitely Russia will react in a bigger way, in a better way than what they are doing now.
Well, Russia's attempts at the United Nations Security Council also failed miserably. What do you attribute the reasons to that for?
If you look at the UN Security Council, it's divided because the peace and security aspects are done in the Security Council. It's like the Cold War situation where one resolution forwarded by one party like the United States or the Soviet Union in the past, it would be vetoed by the other party because of different strategic interests in the world. So is the case now on Russia. On Syria, Russia has a different stance. It wants to protect the Assad regime. It has a base there. It also is very much worried about the Daesh there. So it has a different stance. On the other hand, if you look at the United States, they have a different motive there. So it's a deadlock now in the UN Security Council. Even the Secretary General has expressed his concern that Security Council has reverted to that Cold War era where there is a deadlock. So we cannot expect much from the UN Security Council because any resolution there would be scuttled. What the UN can do is try to arrange some kind of a dialogue between all these regional and major powers, because if they were able to reconcile Russia, United States, France and Britain, the major powers involved there, if they can reconcile, probably then there would be a room for the regional powers who are also involved in this conflict. They could be brought into that reconciliation. But at the moment there seems to be only possibility of a forced peace, which Russia and the Assad regime, they are winning this war. Especially the urban center they have recaptured. The rebels, they have, of course, they have certain areas under their control, especially the rural areas. What these attacks, I think, what I understand from these attacks is that to cut down or to hit a blow to the advances made by Bashar al-Assad, but they also did not cross that red lines. They didn't go beyond that. They also said, Trump said that it's a one shot. They won't go, it won't strategically change much on the region. So somehow there is a hope probably that they now accept Bashar al-Assad to be there, remain there, and also Russia to be there. but they need some kind of a concessions for the rebels. When they want to go toward that transition where Bashar al-Assad shares powers with the rebels and others, and it's a much weakened Bashar al-Assad. It should not be like the past. And they are also scared of that retribution that Bashar al-Assad would have against his opponents. So I think what they are trying to do is that they now know that the rebels cannot win back the territories, but they want to weaken the Bashar al-Assad regime so they can bring him to a reconciliatory position where he gives in some of the power. And thus, in that way, because they have a bigger problem after that, they have to reconstruct Syria, and they have to do it because there are over 3 or 4 million refugees in Turkey and Europe. So Europe doesn't want those refugees to stay there for long. So they want to return those refugees back to Syria. So for that, the Western powers, the Europe, they would involve themselves in the reconstruction process. And there are also groups. There are also human rights watch groups who want Bashar al-Assad even to be tried for some kind of war crimes. And that's also one of the issue. How would they deal with that? So probably these attacks have strategic interest, and that's why I believe that this claim of using chemical weapon, it's an excuse. It's a cover up, and probably the truth would be different.
Sir, let's also talk about the statements coming out of the Kremlin. Western strikes have damaged the chances of achieving a political resolution in this conflict that has killed at least 500,000 people. That's another statement that has come from the Kremlin. Mr. Putin in particular has also stressed that all these actions were committed in violation of the UN Charter, and they continue to do so. So this is a situation where we are right now. The United Nations is a completely ineffectual body. As we have seen, the United States and the Western allies have no respect for the United Nations because they couldn't even wait until those inspectors had made their observations on the ground. So where do we stand in that sort of a situation? So where is politics here?
It's very difficult and complicated politics. You know, the UN Security Council's and Charter's provisions are totally violated. Charter's provision, Article 2(4) says that countries should avoid using force unless it is for international peace and security, and collectively and after authorization by the Security Council.
Self-defense.
So it was on self-defense. So totally violated that. Charter provisions are dead. Only condition you could go there under Article 42. It was again to be cleared and authorized by the Security Council. So the legal framework is totally violated now. They have done it before also. Americans have got engaged and involved during the last 8-10 years in 7-8 different places, including Kosovo, Serbia, and other places where Security Council was late and in certain cases didn't give any approval. Somalia, even in our part of the world, it's not clearly given.
Even
Iraq and coming to Pakistan as well, with Osama bin Laden and all that, violation of your sovereignty. This is clearly a fundamental principle of the Charter, which the Americans and the West are violating. I mean, I remember I was in UN then, Kosovo crisis. The Chinese were very seriously and vehemently opposed to criticize Americans for their action in Kosovo. But this time they are saying it is not a good thing. You are scuttling the UN system and the legal framework of the United Nations, but did not criticize much. They say we prefer that peaceful resolution of conflict should be pursued instead of using force. Here the issue is humanitarian intervention. It is a bigger cause and concern for the international community, middle-sized countries like Pakistan, smaller countries like others. I mean, for us, it's a terrible situation. Any country having little power in the region could tell you, look, you are doing some things which we don't acknowledge, we don't encourage, so we have to go for on our own, on self-defense to violate your sovereignty. Where do you go? For example, our neighbors here, if they decide to go on a humanitarian pretext to cross our territory and borders, what will we do? That type of situation has come. So we should be seriously concerned about the fundamentals of the United Nations, should be respected, charter provisions should be should be of course encouraged and pursued.
I think we're way past that now, sir, because as we spoke about this earlier as well, the attacks, according to the Western allies, struck at the heart of Syria's chemical weapons program, which we thought was already destroyed. And now they're adding insult to injury by saying that the strikes were not aimed at toppling the Assad government, but rather, or didn't want to intervene in the conflict. Is that a joke? What do they think that the rest of the world
I think they wanted to give a message to Russia especially, that they don't have any motives beyond that. So they want to maintain that status quo. They now know that if they go further, probably there would be a retaliation. Russia has warned it. Russia has a base, they have a missile defense system there, and they have said that they will defend the Bashar al-Assad regime. So there is a clear warning and red line from Russia that they cannot cross. And that's why they said that their mission is not beyond that. They won't topple the regime, and they won't have more strikes, against the regime. It's kind of an understanding between them that they won't escalate it further. But they would try to weaken Bashar al-Assad regime and blame it, on these humanitarian issues. Of course, we know human rights have been violated by all the parties, not only the government there. Especially these rebel forces. One solution that people suggest is that if we could stop funding and giving weapons to all these rebels, because they get all the support from different countries, probably there would be one way of ending the conflict and accept Bashar al-Assad and his regime there, which already has regained most of the territories. Now, other issues like the Turkish concerns there regarding the Kurds and the Iranian and Israeli rivalry within Syria, that's something which need to be addressed, but it could be done later on if they could restore the peace. The Turkish, they're at loggerheads with the Americans there. Also with the Assad regime, they have their own angle of,
But the Turkish President, Mr. Recep Tayyip Erdogan, was all praises for this strike.
It's such a multi-layered and complicated kind of a problem that Turkey is also a member of the NATO, but it's also opposed to United States siding with YPG. And United States believes that it's the only fighting force they can, have their bets on the ground there. With Russia, they agree on certain terms, but not on Bashar al-Assad. Now they have accepted, of course, that Bashar al-Assad is going to remain there, but they have. So it's like kind of a transactional type of relationship. They're cooperating in one area, but not in another. It's like in Iraq, Iran and United States, they're cooperating against Daesh there in Iraq, but they are sworn enemies. So it's like transnational kind of a relationship. Sometimes they're time-bound, sometimes they are just for one little strategic goal within that area. So that's why we see a complexity of a situation there, that so many players are involved, regional and neighbors and superpower, and they have all different interests. So I believe that the conflict's going to stay there, going to remain there, but a forced peace could be, achieved, and probably that would be, we may not like it, but since international community, which is represented by the United Nations, it cannot do anything. OIC cannot do anything. It has suspended Syria already, and the Gulf Cooperation, and they have suspended Syria, so it's not part of it. So the Arab countries, they are also divided. They have different interests. For instance, Saudi Arabia and Qatar cannot cooperate within Syria because they have their own diplomatic role going on. United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, they both are involved in Yemen as well. And Egypt, Egypt has, Egypt and Saudi Arabia, Egypt has also concerns regarding Syria. So all the countries have different strategic goals in the region, and that's why it would be really hard.
And they're all working at cross purposes.
Cross purposes in most of the cases. It would be really hard for them to come together and have a one-point solution of a sort there. And even if they come together, so they would be grouping against the influence of Iran there. So Iran, along with Hezbollah, they would want to, what can I say? They would try to dilute that rise of the Sunni power in that region, and that's what they've been doing. So Hezbollah and Iran has another strategic interest. And Israel, look at Israel, it wants, Hezbollah and the Golan Heights there, and the chemical weapons, of course. Nobody talks about it, but I think the major concern for Israel was the chemical weapons in Syria, because these chemical weapons they believed could deter Israel or its nuclear weapons. So they have reached a kind of a consensus with Russia that those will be dismantled. So they're the happiest party at the moment, that those chemical weapons are no more there. So these cross purposes, all the state, I don't see any good news in the near future from Syria at the moment.
Well, let's also talk about the other aspect of Moscow condemning the Western states for, first of all, refusing to wait for the OPCW's findings before they attacked. And Russia also denounced the allegations of a gas attack in Duma and said that it was staged by Britain to whip up anti-Russian hysteria. If you could please comment on this aspect, sir.
Well, people know that main backer or supporter of President Assad is Russia. So whatever they are doing, it's definitely a message being conveyed on not only to Syria but also to Russia and Iran. So they are concerned that British and others link the issue with the Salisbury incident. So a general impression there in the global media is that, well, Russia is pursuing Syria to use chemical weapons. It has used chemical thing, its agent and its people in London, Salisbury recently. So chemical weapons is something that the Russians are promoting and using and asking their allies to use anywhere in the world. So that way, the statements coming from the West about this strengthen the position that basically they are targeting the Russians. So the Russians, as defensive they are, and the present position is trying to give this sort of statements to say that basically you have planned it in such a way, and your statements are basically to blame us and to somehow link Russia as if it is the prime planner and implementer of this sort of decision to use chemical weapons. So it is to deflect the pressure, basically it's trying. Your second part of the question was about
Sir, about the fact that this entire campaign is not aimed at Mr. Assad. What's the whole point then? I mean, we find out that the reason that they attacked the chemical weapons or they removed the chemical capability of Mr. Assad already took place.
yes.
And now they're saying that the objective is, they first accuse Bashar al-Assad of attacking his own people, and then they don't want to get rid of him.
Yeah, they have clarified that basically regime change is not their plan, basically conveying that they don't want to further complicate the situation. And I think the Western countries, especially USA, is also not prepared to involve itself more deeply in the conflict in Syria. That you remember a few weeks ago, it was President Trump declared that he would rather pursue its previous decision to withdraw from the northern region where it has its forces and other stuff to help the Kurdish side of the conflict and players who are trying to pursue the ISIS people. So they were planning to move, and the Russians apparently are thinking that if we do retaliate or criticize the Americans firmly, more intensely, or respond to them, Americans will plan a longer stay in the region, which is not in their interest. They want the Americans and West, okay, fine, they have done the chemical, but basically their interest now is to ensure that regime change is not their agenda, and Bashar al-Assad is not targeted, and Americans and Europeans have clearly said Bashar is not our target.
But how does that make sense, sir? That was my question, which is that isn't that hypocritical and completely illogical that the monster, so-called monster, who is using chemical weapons on his own people is not their target?
This is bad politics. It's a bad politics. They are saying this, and also sometimes they say, okay, you are killing people with chemical weapons is a bigger crime, but in the war front you are keep killing millions, not a big issue. So double standards everywhere. So I think the Americans want the Bashar al-Assad, I think, to stay, not to push him too much against the wall. And eventually, I think they are going to encourage the parties to sit and seek a political solution.
So is it that they just want to carve up Syria according to their own design, which is the old want of the British Empire, which the way they left the British Empire in shambles, they carved it up. They carved up the entire world, so that we are paying for that 100 years later, still,
it's
suffering the repercussions of the demise of the British Empire. Is that what's happening? And we're witnessing it.
Yeah, if you look at Iraq, they have done that in Iraq as well. For instance, in Iraq, there is a free Kurdish region. Here again, we can see that the Kurds have been assured that they would have an autonomous region in the north of the country bordering Turkey, and that creates problem for Turkey because they don't want, a state of Kurds, because it will put pressure on the Kurds in the Turkey, and they're dealing with that resistance. They would also want, for these rebels, to have some kind of a power, whether it's a control over territory or it's within the administration. So they would want that division there, because with that division, they would want to have their people or their proxies maintaining some kind of a power there and influence over the government there. Of course, they would want that because this is what they can achieve at the moment. They cannot go beyond that. They have seen that. They have used force, they have armed the rebels, but they couldn't deliver. But Russia has also given in the red lines that you cannot change the regime, because a change of regime would mean that Russia may lose control of its base there, which is the only base they have in the Mediterranean region, from where it can watch the NATO and other countries. So it has a very much defensive capabilities. It cannot let go of that base. Simply it's a matter of vital strategic interest for Russia. So Russia has given them a red line. You cannot remove Bashar al-Assad, and they cannot directly target him, because if they target him, Russia it will be that red line would be crossed, and Russia would respond with full force. They don't want that, because they won't be able to handle the aftermath of that conflict. Then they are not in a position to handle that. So it will be like the two powers again coming face to face directly, which they would want to avoid. But you are right in that they would try to carve out out of Syria a kind of arrangement. It may be territory, it may be power sharing. That's what they would want. But I think Bashar al-Assad, his policy he won't settle for less than what he already had, because he's winning at the moment. Now, when he's winning, why would he concede? So Bashar al-Assad, I believe, with the help of the Russians, would continue his onslaught and would try to clear all the areas. And it's really a situation which the Arab countries in the region, they don't want this to happen as well. So Turkey may be reconciled with that, but Turkey would want that autonomous Kurdish region, which Bashar al-Assad had promised to those Kurds. If you fight alongside me, I can give you that status. Also, he has issued, most of those Kurds, a lot of those Kurds, they were stateless. They were not accepted by their own government. They didn't have identity cards. So they've been promised that they will be given, that status of citizenship. So I believe Turkey, the concerns of the Turkey can be addressed there, and it will take long, I think. But first, we have to see if there is some kind of a serious dialogue going on.
Talking about a serious dialogue, let's also
so just wait. Even the dialogues, the Western countries, they support a dialogue where Bashar al-Assad is not represented, and when Iran, Russia, and Bashar al-Assad government, they held the dialogues. The Free Syrian Army was not there. So even the conflicting parties, they didn't go there. They didn't trust them. They were not there. So even that dialogue processes, they are divided.
Well, let's also analyze the British Foreign Secretary, Mr. Boris Johnson's statement saying Western powers have no plans for further missile strikes, although they will assess their position if Damascus uses weapons again, chemical weapons. Then he further went on to say that Russia was the only country able to pressurize Mr. Assad to negotiate an end to the conflict.
True. You know, there is no doubt that the total backing that Syrian government is getting is from Russia. So Russia can influence it whatever way it wants to. So far it is clear that Russia wants to back Hafiz al-Assad. He is winning on the ground. Russia has reasons to pursue whatever the policy it has. And Hafiz al-Assad, so far so good, it's doing fine to my understanding. And look at the Arab League countries who met yesterday, also couldn't take a firm position. They are all quiet or supporting whatever is going on by the Western countries.
They criticize Iran.
They criticize Iran and saying that it is involved and all that, not saying anything about the American, of course, strikes, air strikes, but also some of them clearly supporting it. So this is the dilemma of the Arab world at this moment. As far as Boris is concerned, he is right. Russia is doing it, supporting, but at the same time saying that
he was trying to put the entire onus of this conflict on Russia.
It is true, and saying that if Syria again attacks with chemical weapons, there will be Americans and Western powers will strike again. I think this is a serious situation, and the Russians will be very mindful. They must be calculating the risk. It is, I think, not in the interest of Syria at this moment to provoke another strike by the Western powers.
Well, we have a big question mark on whether Syria did conduct the chemical weapon attack in the first place. We have serious doubts about that as well, sir.
Yes, but
because there's no proof. Yeah. Before the proof was gathered, they bombed the place. They destroyed the proof before, if there was any proof. They made sure that there wasn't any left. But so how does that play out? I mean, what are we supposed to
smart move.
infer from that, sir?
Smart move. Put the Syrian government under pressure, and a lot of blame on the Russians. We have to see international community generally, it seems, are approving the measures taken by the West, especially the United States. So the Western powers, they are not losing anything at this moment, it seems. But my fear, as you indicated, that maybe another attempt by Hafiz al-Assad doing something, or Americans and the West taking another pretext to say that yes, we saw another attack taking place, so we have gone again there. This will complicate the situation.
Well, sir, having said that, we have Nikki Haley's statement in the United Nations saying that the U.S.-Russian relationship is very strained and they hope for a better relationship. She further went on to say that the United States would not pull out its troops from Syria until its goals were accomplished. Can you please elaborate or elucidate what those goals might be, sir?
The goals which they have said clearly, that one goal is to dismantle Daesh, which is almost dismantled.
Which is the same goal as Bashar al-Assad.
As Russia's and Assad's.
And Russia and America and the British and the Western allies, they have the same goal.
That's the same goal.
Wow.
The second goal is the chemical red lines. They have, even Obama had said, and Trump had said, if they use chemical weapons, that would be a red line, we'll go after them.
But so it's very illogical that they would do that, because they first got rid of their chemical stockpile.
Yes.
And then why would they?
We don't know. As you said, we don't know for sure who has used it, but it can be used as a pretext, what they say. Those troops, 2,000 troops which are stationed there, probably they're going to remain there for a while, which Trump had said that they will want to pull out because they need boots on the ground for whatever strategic purposes they want to achieve. Whether they want a destabilized Middle East where they remain relevant, maybe that's the goal. That if it's a destabilized, they'll remain relevant in the region and they can do all their power politics there. On the other hand, if you look at the way that Russia has been targeted, it's very clearly said by the United States that the real threat to the United States is from Russia and the rise in China. So what they want to do is they want to stop the rise of Russia, the Russia which is asserting itself now in the region. which for almost 15 or 20 years it was reeling under economic crisis, but which has come up strongly, and now it's asserting itself. Russia is the only country which has that power capability which can destroy United States. Of course, United States can also destroy it. It will be mutually assured destruction. But in that strategic security calculus, it becomes a real threat. It's perceived like that. This assertion of Russia is not taken well by the United States because it is countering that hegemonic role that United States is playing in that region, not only in Middle East but also in the Eastern Europe, and they are scared of that. That's why they wanted they would go after Russia. Especially, they will give them a bad press. That information warfare. They had already got already when it was the Soviet Union. They would get that negative press, and even today they will do that. So. If you look at now the power distribution among the countries, Russia is rising there, China is rising there. So it's plugging that gap, of inequality of power between Western powers and these emerging powers. And it is the one which worries the diplomats or the policymakers of the United States, that what to do with it, whether to contain it again like that Truman doctrine, or to engage it, or probably a mixture of both, containment, contain and engage at the same time. So, and when he said that British official that we need to talk, Russia can pull the string. So he was right in a sense that Russia is the player which has bigger strategic interest here. And since Bashar al-Assad regime depends so much on Russia, so Russia could listen to it. It's like the same. North Korea depending so much on China because it's isolated. So if you want to put pressure on North Korea, the best way is to put pressure on China to bring it, because it's the China which is saying they don't use force or something like that against North Korea. So if you don't want to, so you can also bring it to the negotiating table. And that's what China finds itself much under pressure when there is a escalation, a rhetorical escalation between North Korea and United States. So can be the case with here. But Russia, I think the way it is presenting the case, it's presenting the case from the perspective of international law. And as Ambassador has said that under the international law, the sovereignty could not be violated. The country has the right to self-defense.
Well, we've seen where international law really stands in practical terms. There is no international law left. Is there? They've made a mockery of the United Nations. They've made a mockery of international laws.
Yeah.
So then, what are we talking about?
International law. My take on this is that yes, superpowers, they have violated international. They do violate, but superpowers could also be in the UN. It can in the UN and international community. They can be even shamed. For instance, United Nations didn't allow the Iraq attack. So United States, according to international, is still. The attack on Iraq is considered as illegal. The one on Afghanistan is not.
So shouldn't there be a tribunal and somebody should be held accountable for war crimes, beginning with Iraq and then going on?
How do you do it? You need pressure from the Security Council. So you can't table any resolution, get any resolution approved because veto powers enjoyed by these powers. So they play politics there.
So why do we have such an ineffectual world body which is basically completely redundant and has no value for serving humanity
but we don't have, what's alternative then we should have,
Well, that's the question, sir.
For the time being, it seems to me that at this stage of the war, the preponderance or the better position Russia is holding. First time it is involved in the war, same war front.
So let's suppose, sir, God forbid, if there is another pretext by the Western allies to attack Syria again for whatever reasons, what options does Russia really have? What can Russia do?
I mean, one would think that Russia might retaliate by, trying to...
Do you think they would bomb the United States or Britain? I don't think so, sir.
It will be difficult. But I was saying that it's all posturing in diplomacy that works. And I remember 15 years ago when Kosovo crisis was going on, Serbia was the main, Russia was backer of Serbia, but they calculated how far they would go. When they saw that the Americans were too keen on demolishing Serbia's leadership in Serbia, pullback. Russia pulled back and didn't give that sort of support there on the ground. But here you see they are doing it. They realize that this is the time to establish our assertion, establish strength. There we gave in Serbia, here we cannot. This is the politics that is going on globally. We hope peace sustains and these powers show their cards and play as far as posturing is concerned. There is nothing serious, go beyond control so that we don't go to the Third World War.
Right, sir. Well, some would argue that we're already there. But moving forward, sir, nothing has really changed when we talk about our own personal issue, which is that of Kashmir. And recently we saw this terrible crime that was committed against a helpless 8-year-old child, Asifa Bano, who was raped in a temple protected by the police. Of course, again, we have not seen the kind of international outcry or reaction that such a crime warrants. It also is an eye-opener for the international community to see what is actually happening in Kashmir. We've been harping on about it, but it seems that our voices and the voices of the Kashmiri victims are falling on deaf ears. So does that make the entire world complicit in the misery and the torture of Kashmiri citizens?
Definitely it is. It's terrible what India, the situation and picture is emerging from Kashmir. India is blatantly violating all norms of modern system of respect for human rights and dignity of people, and how brutally that girl was treated. And the good thing, of course, is that Indian media and public opinion is speaking out, which is
I think it took Mr.
positive.
Modi at least 3 or 4 days before he came out with a statement.
Yeah.
So that should also give you an indication of how the Hindutva or BJP government is viewing the situation, and in fact they're fanning the flames themselves by not taking those people to task. There's a whole outcry and outrage of people defending the criminals rather than standing with the victims.
But
what kind
today,
of a world are we living in today, sir?
I think there's a news today that 8 people involved, they were charged or arrested or something like that.
But too
But
late,
could be
too little, too
eyewash.
late, sir. Too
Could
little,
be-
too late.
Too little, too late. Could be eyewash, but I'm hopeful that if the Indian public speak out for whatever reason, maybe not out of sympathy for the girl, but for the fact it is an opportunity to put pressure on Modi. If that way also public opinion cries out, I think it will be a good thing to watch and follow. But unfortunately, so far Indians have failed. All that standards for human rights is totally zero. Kashmir, as far as when it goes to Muslims in Kashmir, they are brutal.
Well, it seems that the Muslims are really having a bad time all over the world now.
That's true. That's true.
Sheryar Saab, any comments that you'd like to make on this?
Well, you asked if international community probably is complicit. India has successfully warded off this kind of criticism on itself. International community, it has convinced that it's the internal affairs of India which they cannot intervene in, and whatever the problem there internally are, they'll be resolved internally through their legislative system or something like that.
Aren't the internal issues of Syria their own problem similarly as what you're saying? If we take that and replace that with every other country.
That's the difference between India and
Double
Syria.
standards everywhere.
India is a strong country. India is a big country. It has a big market, big economy.
So they have the authority to kill
Yes.
their own people with impunity,
Yeah.
but the Syrians do not.
The world looks at it as a strategic partner, as a big market. So they won't question all these things which can even irk their leadership. You saw when a Canadian Prime Minister came, the way they gave him a cold shoulder, and he didn't even complain about that. Why? Because probably they believe that India is such a big country that they're gonna have to live with it and do trade with it or business with it. So that's where India is internationally at the advantageous position. Its story is accepted. Our story is not accepted. Their story is accepted on these affairs.
So whoever has the money has truth on their side now. So this is the world that we're living in today.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for taking all the time and sharing your views with PTV World. Well, you heard the conversation, and it was quite a depressing one, if you ask me. And they say that for this world, all it takes is for good people to keep quiet and say nothing when they see crimes being committed against humanity, and that makes the entire world complicit in the misery of the Kashmiris and of the Syrians and wherever there is injustice taking place. So it's a moment for shame for the entire human race. On that note, it's goodbye.
There seems to be no control in this country or in this city, neither the IG police or the CDA. Anyone comes, they want to just put up barriers and so on. Imagine you go from here to the main road and you have to cross there. Why? Because they have an opening going into their embassy and they don't want to, any of their people getting into an accident from there. So these are things that we have to look into and overall. It's a very unfortunate incident that is placed, but I'll say that the police did the proper thing, they did the right thing, they should be commended for that. And now that he's proven that he's a diplomat and has been confirmed by the Foreign Office, unfortunately or...
Let's hope that in this case the law takes its course.
Yes, well,
because we've seen people get away with murder,
Yeah,
especially Americans or people from other countries who come and kill people either accidentally, unintentionally or intentionally.
Yes.
They have been able to get away with it, and that's
Well,
something
get
that we want
away,
to see
yes,
stop.
let me just mention that fact also. There are scores of accidents taking place. Basically, it's an accident. Whether it happens to involve a diplomat and one from a country where there is very anti-American feeling from here.
Right.
But on the other hand, the other incidents where we have a system, you have the family, we can accept under our system that they can have compensation and go.
Right, sir.
I mean, that
Unfortunately,
is
see,
so,
we're out of time.
not
so-
running away. It is a part of a system. It happens in Saudi Arabia also.
Absolutely.
Pakistani goes, he can do the same from there.
Right.
So this is the system which is prevalent in the country and can be utilized.
And also, there are some international norms that have to be followed in this particular case.
Last word here. But there are cases that we have taken the good word from the Americans and allowed people to go. Raymond Davis had a classical example.
Right.
Not only killing somebody, also running over the motorbike. A promise given by the highest level in America that he was a diplomat and he will be tried back when he's back there. Nothing of the kind has happened. He's a free man.
So we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for taking out the time and sharing your views with PTV World. You heard the conversation, and we hope that the law takes its course and that the Americans also do give the required punishment to the diplomat for this very unfortunate accident. Maybe also try to help the family of the deceased. On that note, it's goodbye.